When I walked onto that stage in front of 2,000 people who had each paid $500 to see the mysterious La Voce d'Oro finally reveal her face, I looked directly at the woman sitting in the center of the front row. Director Margot Ashford, the woman who had told me 7 years ago that the stage required a certain visual harmony that my size 22 body currently lacked, the woman who had stripped me of my vocal scholarship and given my showcase spot to her thin, mediocre goddaughter. The woman who had just sold 2,000 tickets and claimed she had discovered the voice behind the golden mask. I reached up, slowly, deliberately, and lifted the mask from my face. The director's expression collapsed. Her skin went white, her mouth fell open. Because the voice that had captivated the entire world, the voice that La Scala in Milan had offered a historic debut contract, belonged to the fat girl she had silenced. But we're not there yet. Let me take you back to the very beginning. My name is Serafina Cole. I am 27 years old. I live in a small apartment above a bakery in Harlem, New York, and I'm a size 22. I have rich, deep, dark skin that glows like polished mahogany in the right light, thick black hair that falls past my shoulders in heavy, untamed waves, and a body that takes up space, generous, unapologetic, magnificent space. I have wide hips that sway when I walk, full arms that could wrap around you twice, and a stomach that is soft and round and has never once apologized for existing. And I have a voice that can make grown men weep. I don't say that with arrogance. I say it with the calm, earned certainty of someone who has been singing since before she could form complete sentences. My voice is a dramatic soprano, a rich, dark, enormous sound that lives somewhere between velvet and thunder. It can fill a 4,000-seat opera house without amplification. It can drop to a whisper so tender that an entire audience holds its breath. It can climb to a high C so pure, so crystalline, so impossibly beautiful that people have described it as hearing the voice of God through a human throat. My grandmother gave me this voice, not genetically, though she was a singer too, in her own quiet way. She gave it to me the way you give someone a religion. She taught me to worship sound. My grandmother's name was Opal May Cole. She was a large, magnificent woman, size 26, with hands like warm bread loaves and a laugh that shook the walls of her tiny row house in West Baltimore. She had never set foot inside an opera house. She had never heard of Puccini or Verdi or Dvorak. She was a retired school cafeteria cook who had spent 43 years feeding other people's children and singing while she did it. But her voice, Lord, her voice. When my grandmother sang, the kitchen became a cathedral. The grease-spattered walls became stained glass. The chipped linoleum floor became sacred ground. She would stand at the stove stirring a massive pot of collard greens or rolling out biscuit dough with her thick, flour-dusted fingers, and she would sing old spirituals, gospel hymns, lullabies that her own grandmother had hummed in the cotton fields of rural Georgia 100 years before. And there was one song, one lullaby. The one she sang to me every single night when I was small, rocking me against her enormous warm chest, her heartbeat steady beneath my ear like a drum keeping time for the universe. Hush now, little voice. The world ain't ready for you yet. But when it is, oh baby girl, when it is, you're gonna shake the stars right out of the sky. She called me her little voice. Not her little girl. Her little voice. As though my voice was the truest, most essential part of me. As though everything else, my body, my face, my thick legs, my round belly was just the beautiful, necessary vessel that carried the real miracle inside. Your voice is God's fingerprint on this earth, Serafina, she told me once, pressing her warm palm against my chest, right over my heart. He touched you right here and left his mark. Don't you ever let nobody smudge it. I was 5 years old. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I felt it. I felt the weight of it settle into my bones like a tuning fork that would vibrate for the rest of my life. My grandmother died when I was 16. Pancreatic cancer. It took her in 4 months. Fast, brutal, merciless. I held her hand in the hospice room while she slipped away, and the last thing she whispered to me, her voice barely a breath, was, "Sing, baby girl. Sing so loud that heaven hears you." I promised her I would. I applied to the Ashford Conservatory of Music the year after my grandmother died. The Ashford was, and still is, the single most prestigious music conservatory in the United States. Nestled in the Connecticut countryside, housed in a magnificent 19th century stone building with soaring arched windows and rehearsal halls with acoustics so pristine that a single whispered note could be heard in every corner. The Ashford had produced more Metropolitan Opera principals, more Grammy-winning vocalists, more international concert soloists than any other institution in the country. Getting in was nearly impossible. Getting a full vocal scholarship was a statistical miracle. I auditioned on a freezing Tuesday morning in February. I was 17 years old, wearing a simple black dress that my mother had found at a consignment shop in downtown Baltimore. My thick hair pulled back in a braid, my hands trembling so badly I had to press them flat against my thighs to keep them still. I was the only black girl in the audition group. I was the only plus-size applicant. I was, by every visible metric the conservatory traditionally valued, wrong. The audition panel consisted of 5 people. 3 professors, 1 visiting conductor from the Berlin Philharmonic, and the conservatory's director, Margot Ashford. The granddaughter of the school's founder, a severe, razor-thin woman in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, ice-blue eyes, and the kind of bone structure that suggested generations of carefully maintained aristocratic breeding. She wore a black Armani blazer, a single strand of pearls, and an expression of barely concealed boredom. I walked to the center of the stage. The spotlight was blinding. The auditorium was cavernous, cold, and silent. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the stone walls. Name and selection, the panel coordinator said flatly without looking up from her clipboard. Serafina Cole. I'll be singing O mio babbino caro by Puccini. A small ripple passed through the panel. It was one of the most technically demanding arias in the soprano repertoire, a piece that most 17-year-olds wouldn't dare attempt. The visiting conductor raised an eyebrow. Director Ashford's expression didn't change. I closed my eyes. I thought of my grandmother. I thought of her kitchen. I thought of flour dust and collard greens and the steady, warm rhythm of her heartbeat beneath my ear. I opened my mouth, and I sang. The first note came out like a thread of liquid gold, pure, trembling, impossibly delicate. It hung in the air of that stone auditorium like a living thing, shimmering, weightless. Then the melody opened, and my voice opened with it, swelling from that single fragile thread into a sound so vast, so rich, so achingly beautiful that it seemed to fill not just the auditorium but the spaces between molecules. The acoustics of the hall caught every harmonic, every overtone, every micro-vibration of my vocal cords, and sent them cascading through the air like ripples in still water. I sang with my eyes closed. I sang the way my grandmother taught me, not to the audience, but through them, past the panel, past the stone walls, past the frozen Connecticut sky. I sang to Opal May Cole, wherever she was, and I told her with every note that I had kept my promise. When the last note faded, a pianissimo high A-flat that I held for 11 seconds, letting it dissolve into silence like a candle flame dying in still air, I opened my eyes. The visiting conductor from Berlin was crying, not misty-eyed, not touched, crying. Tears were streaming openly down his lined, dignified face, and he was making no effort whatsoever to hide them. One of the professors had her hand pressed over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Another had removed his glasses and was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Director Ashford was sitting perfectly still. Her face was unreadable. Her ice-blue eyes were locked on me with an intensity that I couldn't decipher, something between recognition and resentment, admiration and alarm. The silence lasted 7 full seconds. Then the conductor from Berlin stood up. He didn't applaud, he bowed. A 73-year-old man who had conducted at La Scala, at the Vienna State Opera, at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. He stood up and bowed to a 17-year-old girl from West Baltimore in a consignment shop dress. The rest of the panel followed, standing ovation, all 5 of them, on their feet. I received the Ashford Conservatory's most prestigious full vocal scholarship, the Founder's Merit Award, within 72 hours, full tuition, room, board, and a guaranteed solo spot in the year-end showcase for all 4 years. It was the first time in the Conservatory's 90-year history that the award had been given by unanimous decision. I was going to sing on the most famous student stage in America, or so I thought. Now, before I tell you what happened on my first day, I want to hear from you. Have you ever earned something, truly earned it with everything you had, only to have someone take it away because of how you looked? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what this woman did to me, I still feel it in my chest. I arrived at the Ashford Conservatory on a bright September morning, carrying 2 suitcases and my grandmother's old hymnal, the one with the cracked leather spine and her handwriting in the margins. The campus was breathtaking, Rolling green lawns, ancient oak trees, stone buildings covered in ivy. Students walked in clusters, carrying instrument cases, laughing, radiating the casual confidence of people who had always been told they belonged in beautiful places. I was assigned a room in the vocal arts dormitory. I unpacked my grandmother's hymnal and placed it on my nightstand, right where I could see it when I woke up every morning. I pressed my palm against its cover. The leather was warm, as though she'd just been holding it, and whispered, "I'm here, Grandma, I made it." 2 hours later, I was called to the director's office. I walked down the long, marble-floored hallway of the administrative building, my footsteps echoing against the vaulted ceilings. Oil paintings of past directors and famous alumni lined the walls, all thin, all white, all severe. I knocked on the heavy oak door. "Come in!" Director Margot Ashford was sitting behind an enormous mahogany desk framed by a window that overlooked the conservatory's main courtyard. She was wearing a charcoal Chanel suit, her silver hair gleaming like brushed metal. She did not smile. She did not stand. She did not offer me a seat. "Serafina, close the door." I closed it. The click of the latch sounded like a lock turning. "I'll be direct with you," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Your audition was technically impressive. The panel was quite moved, but the Ashford Conservatory has a reputation to maintain, a visual standard, a tradition of excellence that extends beyond mere vocal ability." My stomach tightened. I stood perfectly still. The performance track, the showcase, the recitals, the public-facing program requires a certain physical discipline and visual harmony that you, in your current state, frankly lack. The words landed like individual blows. Physical discipline, visual harmony. Current state, each phrase was a polished, elegant weapon designed to wound without leaving visible marks. "I've made the decision to reassign you," she continued, her voice as smooth and cold as marble. "You'll be moving from the performance track to the music theory concentration. It's an excellent program, very rigorous. You'll receive a world-class education in composition, analysis, and musicology. You simply won't be performing." I couldn't breathe. The edges of the room blurred. "The showcase spot that was allocated for your scholarship," she continued, straightening a paper on her desk, "will be reassigned to Isabelle Marchand. She's a wonderful young soprano. Very promising. She has the complete package: voice, presence, visual appeal. Isabelle Marchand." I would learn later that she was Director Ashford's goddaughter, that her mother and the director had been roommates at this very conservatory 35 years ago. That Isabelle's voice was competent, but utterly unremarkable. A thin, reedy soprano with limited range, inconsistent pitch control, and none of the emotional depth that separates a technician from an artist. She was a size 4. She was blonde. She had the kind of delicate, photogenic bone structure that looked stunning in the conservatory's marketing materials. She was everything I was not, and she had everything that was supposed to be mine. "Do you have any questions?" Director Ashford asked, looking at me the way one might look at an administrative inconvenience. 1,000 questions burned in my throat, 1,000 screams, 1,000 of my grandmother's words. "Your voice is God's fingerprint thundering against the inside of my skull." But I swallowed them all. Every single one. "No, Director Ashford," I said. My voice did not waver. "No questions." I turned, I walked out. I closed the heavy oak door behind me. And then I stood in that long marble-floored hallway, surrounded by oil paintings of thin, severe faces, and I pressed my back against the cold stone wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My thick thighs pressed against my chest, my arms wrapped around my knees, and I cried, not loud, not dramatic. I cried the way you cry when something inside you breaks so cleanly, so precisely, that you can feel the exact fracture line running through your chest. Silent tears, steady tears. The tears of a woman whose voice had made a Berlin conductor weep and whose body had made a director ashamed. I sat on that cold floor for 23 minutes, and somewhere between the 17th and 18th minute something happened inside me. The grief calcified, the heartbreak hardened, and a plan, quiet, patient, devastating, began to take shape in the darkness behind my closed eyes. She had silenced my voice, but she had not destroyed it. I did exactly what Director Ashford told me to do. I studied music theory. I studied it with a ferocity, a thoroughness, a bone-deep obsessive brilliance that stunned every professor in the department. I learned harmonic analysis, counterpoint, orchestration, and composition at a level that most doctoral students never achieve. I could deconstruct a Beethoven symphony the way a master watchmaker deconstructs a Swiss timepiece, identifying every gear, every spring, every microscopic mechanism that made the whole miraculous machine function. I graduated top of my class, highest honors, perfect GPA. My thesis, a 200-page analysis of vocal resonance patterns in 19th century Italian opera, was described by my advisor as the most original and technically brilliant piece of music scholarship this institution has produced in a decade. Director Ashford presented me with the Academic Excellence Award at graduation. She shook my hand briskly, smiled for the photographer, and moved on without making eye contact. But what she didn't know, what nobody at the Ashford Conservatory knew, was what I had been doing at night. Every evening, after the theory seminars ended and the practice rooms went dark, I would take the last bus into New Haven, and then the train into New York, and then the subway down to a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district that had been transformed into an underground performance space called the Vault. The Vault was legendary in certain circles, a secret, invitation-only venue where the city's most daring musicians, dancers, and performers gathered to create art without rules, without gatekeepers, without the suffocating constraints of institutional approval. The audience was a wild mix of downtown artists, uptown socialites looking for thrills, European music producers, and anonymous patrons who paid in cash and never gave their names. I had discovered the Vault through Marcus Chen, a composition student at the conservatory who had heard me singing alone in an empty practice room at 2 a.m. I thought everyone had left and had stood outside the door, frozen, listening for 45 minutes before he finally knocked. "That voice," he had said, his eyes wide, his face pale with the shock of accidental revelation. "That voice does not belong in a theory classroom. That voice belongs on a stage." "I'm not allowed on a stage," I had replied flatly. The director reassigned me. Marcus had stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, a slow, conspiratorial, quietly revolutionary smile. "She reassigned you from her stage. She doesn't own every stage in the world." 2 weeks later, I stood in the center of the Vault's makeshift performance space, a circular platform surrounded by exposed brick walls and industrial lighting, and I performed for the first time since my audition. I was terrified, my hands were shaking, my throat was dry. But I had made one decision that changed everything. I wore a mask. It was a golden mask, a half-face Venetian mask that Marcus had found at a costume shop in Greenwich Village, hand-painted with delicate gold leaf scrollwork that caught the light and scattered it like sparks. It covered everything from my forehead to the bridge of my nose, leaving only my mouth, my jaw, and my chin visible. Behind it, I was anonymous. Behind it, I was not Serafina Cole, the plus-size girl who had been deemed too fat for the stage. Behind it, I was only my voice. I opened my mouth and I sang Puccini's Nessun Dorma. The room held 63 people. By the time I reached the final climactic phrase, vincerò, vincerò, every single one of them was on their feet. 3 people were openly sobbing. A woman in the front row had her hands pressed over her heart as though she were trying to keep it from breaking through her ribcage. The standing ovation lasted 4.5 minutes. That night, someone in the audience posted a 30-second clip to social media. A shaky phone video, a large, magnificent woman in a golden mask, her body swaying with the music, her voice tearing through the darkness like sunrise. The caption read, "I just heard the voice of God in a warehouse in Manhattan. Who is this woman?" The clip got 50,000 views in 12 hours. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now. Because what happens next is something I still can't believe actually happened to me. I performed at the Vault once a month for 3 years, always masked, always anonymous. Marcus became my manager, my protector, my co-conspirator. He handled the logistics, he controlled the guest lists, he ensured that no one, absolutely no one, discovered the identity of the woman behind the golden mask. The audience gave me my name. After my 3rd performance, a devastating rendition of Dvorak's Song to the Moon that left half the room in tears, someone in the crowd shouted, "La Voce d'Oro! The golden voice! It stuck!" The legend of La Voce d'Oro grew like wildfire. Underground recordings leaked online. Each one went viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, music critics from the New York Times and The Guardian writing breathless articles trying to identify the mysterious soprano. The most extraordinary vocal talent to emerge in a generation, the Times wrote. A voice of such primal, devastating beauty that it renders the listener fundamentally changed. The Guardian called it a vocal phenomenon that defies categorization, equal parts callous, Leontine price, and raw divine intervention. Performance requests poured in from around the world. I said no to all of them. No interviews, no photographs, no public appearances outside the vault. The mask stayed on. The mystery deepened. And the demand became insatiable. Then, in the spring of my third year, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Marcus called me at 6 a.m., his voice shaking. "Serafina, you need to sit down." "What is it?" "La Scala just emailed, Teatro alla Scala, Milan. They want to offer La Voce d'Oro a debut contract for next season's opening night." I stopped breathing. La Scala, the most famous opera house on earth. The stage where Maria Callas had wept, where Luciano Pavarotti had soared, where the greatest voices in human history had poured their souls into the ancient, hallowed air. They wanted me. They wanted the voice that director Margot Ashford had deemed unworthy of a student showcase. The contract was for 3 performances, starting with the opening night of the new season. The fee was $750,000. The artistic director of La Scala had written a personal note. "We do not care about the mask. We do not care about the mystery. We care only about the voice, and this voice belongs on our stage." I cried for an hour. Then I signed the contract. But before Milan, there was one more thing I needed to do. After graduation, I had quietly begun a second career that no one, not Marcus, not my mother, not anyone knew about. Using the royalties from my viral underground recordings, combined with a small inheritance from my grandmother's estate, I had begun investing carefully, patiently, strategically. Over 3 years, I had turned that initial capital into something substantial, and 6 months before the gala, I made the most important purchase of my life. I bought a building. A specific building, a magnificent 19th century stone building with soaring arched windows and rehearsal halls with pristine acoustics. Nestled in the Connecticut countryside, I bought the Ashford Conservatory. Or, more precisely, I bought the building that housed it. The conservatory leased its facilities from a real estate trust that had been struggling financially for years. I acquired the trust's entire portfolio through a holding company that bore no connection to my name. The paperwork was airtight. The acquisition was silent. And I, Serafina Cole, the girl who had been banished from the stage, was now the landlord of the institution that had tried to erase her. But there was one detail about that building that made the purchase infinitely sweeter. A detail I had discovered through months of research, buried in county property records from 1947. The Ashford Conservatory building had originally been a private residence, before it was donated to the Ashford family in 1952 and converted into a music school. It had been the childhood home of a large, joyful, music-loving family named Cole. My grandmother, Opal May Cole, had been born in that building. She had taken her first breath in the upstairs bedroom that was now the director's private office. She had learned to sing in the kitchen that was now the school's main rehearsal hall. I had bought my grandmother's childhood home, and the woman who had silenced my voice was paying rent to a ghost. Director Margot Ashford's conservatory was dying. Enrollment had declined by 38% over the past 5 years. Donors were pulling funding. The school's reputation, once unassailable, had been quietly eroding as younger, more diverse institutions overtook it in national rankings. The Ashford Conservatory was becoming what its director feared most: irrelevant. Margot needed a miracle, and she believed she had found one. The La Voce d'Oro phenomenon had become a global obsession. The masked soprano was the most talked-about figure in classical music. Every major institution wanted to claim a connection to her. And Margot Ashford, with the cunning, desperate calculation of a woman watching her empire crumble, saw an opportunity. She organized the Ashford Conservatory's Centennial Anniversary Gala, the most ambitious event in the school's history. A one-night-only spectacular in the conservatory's grand performance hall, featuring a curated program of the school's most celebrated alumni, and the centerpiece, the crown jewel. The reason people would pay $500 per seat, the exclusive world premiere, unmasked performance of La Voce d'Oro. Margot announced it to the press with breathless, theatrical grandeur. She claimed that La Voce d'Oro had deep ties to the Ashford Conservatory and that the unmasking would reveal the culmination of the Ashford tradition of excellence. She implied, without ever stating it directly, that she had personally mentored the mysterious soprano, that she had discovered this extraordinary talent, that La Voce d'Oro was a product of the Ashford system, the Ashford vision, the Ashford legacy. 2,000 tickets sold out in 11 minutes. $500 each, $1 million in revenue. Corporate sponsors flooded in. PBS secured the broadcast rights. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Vanity Fair, and every major music publication in the world confirmed attendance. It was going to be the classical music event of the decade. Margot had no idea who La Voce d'Oro actually was. She had never contacted me. She had never received permission to use my name, my image, or my brand. She had simply gambled with the arrogance of a woman who had spent her entire career controlling narratives, that she could claim ownership of a voice she had never nurtured, a talent she had actively suppressed, a woman she had tried to destroy. She sold 2,000 tickets on someone else's stolen glory. Now, I want you to stop and think about this for a moment. If you were me, if the woman who had silenced your voice was now selling tickets to your unmasking and claiming she had discovered you, what would you do? Would you expose her publicly? Would you refuse to perform? Or would you do something else entirely? Tell me in the comments. Because what I did, I don't think anyone saw it coming. What Margot didn't know was that her plan had a fatal flaw, a flaw named Isabelle Marchand. Isabelle, the thin, blonde goddaughter whose mediocre soprano had been given my showcase spot 7 years earlier, had spent the past 3 years attending every single La Voce d'Oro performance at the Vault. She had been in the audience at my very first show. She had wept through my Dvorak. She had stood and screamed during my Puccini. She had become, quietly and without anyone's knowledge, the most devoted fan La Voce d'Oro had ever had. She didn't know it was me. She didn't recognize my voice, or perhaps she did on some subconscious level, and that was precisely why it moved her so deeply. But she knew that whoever was behind that golden mask possessed something that she herself had always known she lacked. Something that could not be taught, could not be bought, could not be transferred through nepotism or goddaughter privilege. Isabelle had tried to tell her godmother. She had sat in Margot's office, twisting her hands in her lap, and said, "Aunt Margot, you don't know who this person is. You can't just claim you discovered her. What if she's not connected to the school at all?" Margot had dismissed her with a wave of her manicured hand. "Darling, it doesn't matter who she is. What matters is who the audience believes she is. And by the time the curtain rises, they'll believe she's ours." Isabelle had left the office with a sick feeling in her stomach and a growing suspicion that the woman who had given her everything had taken something far more precious from someone else. The night of November 17th was cold and clear, with a sky full of sharp, brittle stars that looked like they had been cut from ice. The Ashford Conservatory's grand performance hall was transformed, 2,000 seats filled with the most powerful figures in classical music, philanthropy, and media. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across the vaulted stone ceiling. A 60-piece orchestra sat in the pit, instruments gleaming. Television cameras lined the aisles. The air hummed with the electric, almost unbearable anticipation of an audience about to witness history. Director Margot Ashford stood backstage in a stunning black Valentino gown. Her silver hair swept into an architectural updo, diamond earrings catching the light. She was radiant. She was triumphant. She had pulled off the impossible, organized the most prestigious classical music event in a decade, and positioned herself at its center. Her school would be saved. Her legacy would be cemented. La Voce d'Oro would be unveiled as an Ashford protégé, and the world would credit Margot Ashford with discovering the voice of the century. At precisely 8 p.m., the house lights dimmed. The audience fell silent, a sudden, reverent, breathless silence that felt like the moment before a cathedral bell strikes midnight. Margot walked to the center of the stage, bathed in a single warm spotlight, and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tonight you are about to witness something that has never happened before in the history of this conservatory, and perhaps in the history of music itself. Tonight, after years of mystery, after millions of people around the world have listened and wondered and wept, the identity of La Voce d'Oro, the golden voice, will finally be revealed." She paused, the camera zoomed in. 2,000 people held their breath, and I am profoundly honored to tell you that La Voce d'Oro has deep roots in this very institution. The Ashford Conservatory has always been the cradle of extraordinary voices, and tonight we bring one of our greatest treasures home. The audience erupted in applause. Margot smiled, a wide, genuine, utterly self-satisfied smile, and extended her arm toward the wings of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, La Voce d'Oro." The spotlight shifted. The orchestra played the opening measures of Casta Diva from Bellini's Norma, a choice I had made deliberately because it was the aria that demanded the most vulnerability, the most raw, exposed, unprotected emotion from a soprano. There was nowhere to hide inside Casta Diva. It stripped you bare. I walked out from the wings. The audience gasped, not at my face, which was still hidden behind the golden mask, but at the sheer, overwhelming presence of me. I was wearing a floor-length burgundy velvet gown that clung to every curve and roll of my size 22 body, a gown that had been custom-made by a designer in Milan who had told me, as she pinned the fabric around my hips, "This body was made for velvet, this body was made for stages." My thick black hair cascaded freely over my shoulders, adorned with tiny gold pins that caught the light like scattered stars. My skin glowed deep, rich, luminous mahogany under the warm stage lights. I was enormous. I was magnificent. I was the most beautiful thing in that room. I walked to the center of the stage. I faced the audience. The orchestra swelled. And then slowly, deliberately, with the careful precision of a woman who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in her mind, I reached up and removed the golden mask. The gasp that went through the audience was audible on the broadcast recording. 2,000 people inhaling simultaneously, a sound like wind sweeping through a canyon. But I wasn't looking at the audience. I was looking at the front row, at the center seat, at director Margot Ashford. Her face underwent a transformation that I will remember for the rest of my life. First, confusion, a furrowing of the brow, a slight tilt of the head, the expression of someone trying to place a familiar face. Then, recognition, the blue eyes widening, the lips parting, the blood draining from her cheeks in a visible physical tide, leaving her skin the color of old paper. And finally, horror. Pure, undiluted, catastrophic horror. The horror of a woman who has just realized that the edifice of lies she has constructed is about to collapse on top of her, on live TV, in front of every person who has ever mattered in her professional life. She recognized me. The fat girl from the hallway. The voice she had reassigned. The talent she had buried. The scholarship student she had robbed and replaced with her mediocre goddaughter. Serafina Cole was La Voce d'Oro, and director Margot Ashford had just told 2,000 people and a national television audience that she had discovered me. I did not speak, I did not need to. I simply held her gaze for 3 long, devastating seconds, and then I turned to the orchestra conductor, gave the slightest nod, and opened my mouth. I did not sing Casta Diva. I sang my grandmother's lullaby. I sang the song that Opal May Cole had hummed in her kitchen in West Baltimore. The song she had whispered into my ear every night, rocking me against her warm, enormous chest. I sang it in an arrangement I had composed myself, a full orchestral arrangement that transformed a simple lullaby into a sweeping, devastating, soul-shattering aria that built from a whisper to a crescendo so powerful that the chandeliers above the audience trembled. Hush now, little voice. The world ain't ready for you yet. But when it is, oh baby girl, when it is, you're gonna shake the stars right out of the sky. I sang it for my grandmother, for her kitchen, for her flour-dusted hands and her cracked leather hymnal, and her heartbeat steady like a drum. I sang it for every large woman who had ever been told her body disqualified her from beauty, for every voice that had been assigned to silence, for every girl who had been pulled into a hallway and told that the stage required a visual harmony that her body currently lacked. I sang it for Serafina Cole at 17, standing in a cold audition room in a consignment shop dress, making a panel of experts weep, and still being told she wasn't enough. I sang it with my eyes wide open, tears streaming freely down my face, my voice pouring out of me like something too big for a single human body to contain, filling every corner of that ancient stone building, my grandmother's childhood home, with a sound so beautiful, so raw, so impossibly pure, that afterward the music critic from the New York Times would write, "In 30 years of reviewing opera, I have never heard anything like what I heard tonight." Serafina Cole did not perform, she administered a sacrament. The aria lasted 7 minutes and 14 seconds. When the last note faded, a pianissimo echo of my grandmother's melody, dissolving into silence like morning mist, the hall was utterly, completely still. Then the audience exploded, 2,000 people on their feet. The roar of applause was so loud that the sound engineer for the PBS broadcast later said it clipped every microphone in the building. People were weeping openly, men in tuxedos, women in couture gowns, hardened music critics who prided themselves on emotional detachment, crying without shame, without restraint, the way you cry when something fundamentally sacred has touched the deepest part of you. I stood at the center of that storm of sound, holding my grandmother's melody in my chest like a warm coal, and I waited. I waited for the applause to crest, to peak, to reach that breathless moment where it begins to fade, and the silence returns and the world is ready to hear you speak. And then I spoke. My name is Serafina Cole. I am 27 years old, I am a size 22, and 7 years ago I walked into this building on a full vocal scholarship, the Founders Merit Award, granted by unanimous decision because my voice made the audition panel cry. The applause died. 2,000 people went silent. The cameras zoomed in. On my first day, the director of this conservatory, Director Margot Ashford, who is sitting right there in the front row, pulled me into her office and told me that I was being removed from the performance track. She told me that the stage requires a certain physical discipline and visual harmony that my body currently lacked. She gave my showcase spot to her goddaughter, a student whose voice could not carry this room even if you gave her a megaphone. A murmur swept through the audience like a shockwave. Every head turned toward the front row. Director Ashford had not moved. She was sitting in her seat, rigid, her face a mask of white, frozen devastation. Her hands were gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles looked like exposed bone. She told me to study music theory, so I did. I studied it so well that I graduated top of the class, and then I left. And I found stages that didn't require me to starve myself to stand on them. I sang in warehouses and underground clubs and converted factory floors, wearing a golden mask because I knew that the moment people saw my body, they would stop hearing my voice, the same way the director did. I paused. I let the silence do its work. Tonight, Director Ashford sold 2,000 tickets and told you she discovered me. She told you La Voce d'Oro had deep roots in this institution. And she's right. I do have deep roots here. My grandmother, Opal May Cole, was born in this building. She took her first breath in the room that is now the director's office. She learned to sing in the room that is now the main rehearsal hall. This building is my grandmother's home. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and produced a single folded document, which is why 6 months ago I purchased it. If the gasp earlier had been a canyon wind, this one was a thunderclap. The murmur that swept through the audience became a roar. People turned to each other in disbelief, mouths open, eyes wide. The PBS cameras caught everything. Every shocked face, every whispered exclamation, every pair of eyes swinging between the devastated director and the magnificent woman standing at center stage. I am the new owner of this building, effective immediately. Director Ashford's contract as head of this institution is terminated. Her lease is not being renewed. I turned to look at her directly. She was crying. The ice blue eyes that had dismissed me, the thin lips that had told me I lacked visual harmony, the manicured hands that had signed the paperwork transferring my showcase spot to her goddaughter. All of it was crumbling. She looked small. She looked old. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had gambled on someone else's stolen brilliance and lost everything. I am dedicating this performance, I said, my voice strong, my chin lifted, my tears catching the stage light like diamonds, to every voice that was ever told it didn't look right. To every woman who was ever pulled into a hallway and told her body disqualified her from her own gift. And to my grandmother, Opal May Cole, who told me when I was 5 years old that my voice was God's fingerprint on this earth. I pressed my hand against my chest, the same gesture my grandmother had made, her warm palm over my heart, and whispered into the microphone, "I kept my promise, Grandma. Heaven heard me." The ovation that followed was the longest in the conservatory's 100-year history. 11 minutes. The orchestra stood. The stagehands stood. The PBS camera operators stood. And somewhere in the back of the hall, standing on her seat with tears pouring down her face, clapping until her palms burned red, was Isabelle Marchand, the director's goddaughter, the thin soprano who had been given my spot, applauding louder than anyone else in the building. After the show, she found me backstage. She was shaking, her mascara was destroyed. She could barely speak. "Serafina, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew what she did was wrong. I knew my voice wasn't. I knew I didn't deserve," she broke down. "I should have given it back. Your spot, I should have refused." I looked at her, this small, trembling woman who had been weaponized by her own godmother, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not resentment, compassion. Because Isabelle Marchand had been used too. She had been given a spotlight she never earned and forced to stand in it knowing, every single day, that it didn't belong to her. That is its own kind of prison. Isabel, I said quietly, you don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself the courage to find your own voice. Whatever it sounds like, wherever it leads, don't let anyone hand you someone else's dream again. She nodded. She hugged me, her thin arms barely reaching around my wide body, and she whispered, "You were always the voice. You were always the one. If this story hit you, if you've ever been silenced because of your body, if you've ever had your talent dismissed because you didn't fit someone's idea of what greatness should look like, if you've ever been pushed into a hallway and told the stage wasn't for you, drop a comment below. Tell me your story." I read every single one of them, and if this gave you chills, you're going to love the next one. Click the video on your screen right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our community. We drop a new revenge story every single week. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss one. I'll see you in the next one. You cannot silence a voice that was meant to shake the stars.